and so on. And about 400, 500 years later, there's some of those wise guys in Babylon are studying all these charts and papers, and they see this star, and they say, wait, they said a king was going to be born, and got together an entourage, and they traveled across the desert. They end up in Jerusalem saying, we saw his star in the east and are come to worship them. How do you think they heard about the Christ? It was because Nebuchadnezzar captured a little boy named Daniel and took him into Babylon, and Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and a bunch of Jewish kids went to Babylon, and the Lord turned it all to good. You see, isn't that cool? We get all frustrated about politics, and I think we should be very active, and I think we should be involved in politics, as you know. But when things don't go our way, we're like, the end of the world. I'm reading an encyclopedia of Coles County right now. It is fascinating. It's about this thick, and it's big. Sonny Baber loaned it to me. He didn't give it to me. It's his dad. His dad bought it. It was published, in 1906. And there's all kinds of fun stuff in there. Learning all about Coles County, how it was built. And I was telling Brother Tom out there a minute ago that a lot of the things I'm reading explain the condition of this county and where it's at and what has happened. And I mean, there's stuff. Did you know there was an Asiatic, think China, Asiatic cholera epidemic in Coles County in the 1800s? And you know, in the encyclopedia it says that the people that died were not as many as they said had died. Yeah, it said it was overstated how many people died from this Asiatic epidemic. Can you hear China virus in there? 1800s. Interesting, wasn't it? There's a lot of stuff. There was a meteor shower in, anybody heard about that? In this area. There's a plains area, and there's this meteor shower, late 1800s, and people thought that the world was coming to an end. Because they would walk out, and they said that just fire was crackling in the sky, and they're watching fire rain down from the sky and these meteors. And it said for years, 10 or 20 years afterwards, people were still felt like the end of the world was close. And because, you know, their world was completely, all they knew was this part of the world. And their world was completely upside down. That's how we see things. We see things locally, don't we? And we're like, wow, everything's going to fall apart because my taxes have gone up. Did you know that Coles County has always had high taxes? Yeah, since they started taxing people, it said the taxes are always too high. Yeah, 1900, they were complaining about it. Of course, they were a lot less than what they are now. But, yeah, it has names of people. I found out one of my relatives lived here. One of the first settlers. Can you believe that? His name was Shreve, and he settled up in here, and they don't know where he came from or where he went to or what year he was here. They just know he was here. So that's nice. I think Katie and I are working on something. I think I'm gonna start putting some of this on audio and read it so that put it on a podcast so people in the community can hear it, because some of the stories are hilarious. There was a couple of guys, I'll tell you this, there was a couple of guys that were pranking each other, 1800s, the justice of the peace in Coles County, and another fella, we'll call him Mike, I can't remember his name. So Mike and the JP were going back and forth, always pulling practical jokes. They're just young guys, they weren't real old, but they thought it was fun, and so Mike decided he was going to set up a wedding way away from Coles County or from the center of Coles County. So the Justice of the Peace had to travel to that place to do the wedding. Well, so he traveled, went up there with all of his paperwork and everything, got to this place to perform the wedding, and there was no wedding. Well, the JP, he didn't say anything. Didn't say anything to Mike about it at all. So he just goes back and finds out that Mike likes this one girl. Well, back in those days, for fun, get this, the young people would have sham weddings for fun in Coles County. Sham weddings. So they would all get together in this big party and say, oh, these two ought to get married. So they'd have somebody stand up and solemnly proclaim them husband and wife, and everybody would party, and that's what they did just for fun. They didn't have TV, guys. I mean, yeah. So, and then everybody go away and everything was fun. Well, the Justice of Peace, the JP, he decided he was going to prank Mike back. So this day came, and Mike had this one girl. He was sweet on this girl, and so he decided he was going to perform a wedding. Only, not telling Mike what he was doing, he went and signed all the paperwork, filed it all in the courthouse, and then came back and said, now, in this sham wedding, I'm the JP, so let's solemnly declare it. He asked them all the questions and everything, did everything, and everybody's like, ha ha, it's funny, this is funny. And they get done, he signs the paperwork, turns and walks away and goes, files it in the courthouse, never says anything. Mike didn't know he was married for a couple of days. Finally, they come back and find out that everything was legal, and the two of them are married, had no idea. That was pretty funny. I thought it was hilarious. That was a pretty serious prank. Well, the story goes on to say, and they were happily married. They decided, after being angry at first at how it was done, then they decided, well, we're going to make the best of a bad situation. And they said that there's not a happier couple in Coles County. There was a lynching. There was a lynching in Mattoon. Some lady coming through the area said that there was a black fellow that was here. I guess it was a Negro barber that was in town for some years, and everybody liked him. And there was some other guy. It was a colored man. That's what this says in the book. He's colored, and he said he was an upstanding citizen, and everybody liked him. Well, this lady coming through on a train, she accused him of I can't remember the word, but she accused him of something. And so they went and grabbed him and lynched him and hung him from the water tower, only to find out she was a liar and had made up the whole thing. And so that was a sad event. It talks about how Mattoon raised $144,000 to put in the university here in Mattoon, and then the governor and a bunch of other people stole it and took it to Charleston. That was interesting. First 4 graduates of the university. There were four graduates, 1900, I think, were the first graduating class. Isn't that interesting stuff? I don't know. I think it is. It's kind of fun. There's a whole lot of things like that. But the point I was making when I told that story, besides just having fun telling all those stories, the one about the fire coming down and everything, they thought the world had come to an end because their viewpoint was narrow. And they thought, wow, everything's going to fall apart. We can't make this through this time. And politicians come and go, kings come and go, governing systems come and go. Coles County used to be a Whig county. And we kept voting even after there was no presidential Whig candidate. Coles County kept voting for the Whigs until there was no more Whig. You guys know what I'm talking about. It was I think there before the Republicans, and there was no. We kept voting. We're going to get the Whigs out there, and there was no party left. I'm like, oh no, the world's coming to an end. Now, God uses those secular politicians sometimes to set things up because his goal really is to reach people for Christ. And inadvertently, in this story, Gallio inadvertently set Paul up and protected him. And then what's funny is, the Greeks then, that lived there, because of all of the mess that was going on around Paul, and because the Jews in the synagogue hated Paul, the Gentile people then came to the synagogue and dragged the chief guy out of the synagogue and beat him in front of Gallio giving Paul complete protection from the Jews. It was some mob. You think, again, you think about this. We're worried about these mobs and everything. Look, I guess what I'm trying to tell you is this. God has his way in the whirlwind. We don't need to walk around scared all the time. God took the mob and turned them into protection for Paul and the gospel. I tell you what, the one thing God's more interested in than anything else is the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you're about the gospel of Jesus Christ, my friends, there's going to be a lot of protection for you. If you're interested in what God's interested in, you'd be surprised at how much freedom he gives you. I don't know, how many of you guys would recognize the name Lester Roloff if I told you? Okay, so how many of you are familiar with the battle Lester Roloff fought in the 70s? Maybe late 70s, I'm thinking 78, 79, maybe 80s, early 80s maybe. Maybe early 80s. So there was a big problem down there. Lester Roloff had a boys' home. It was about that time that the public school had decided that they were going to do away with paddling because paddling no longer works. I mean, of course, we didn't have any shootings in the school back then. But no longer, paddling doesn't work anymore. So we're just going to do timeouts and we're going to just do that kind of stuff. So anyway, there were still some Christian organizations that still used what they called capital punishment, or corporal punishment. Corporal is what the word they used, where they would paddle. And there was a church up in Chesterton, Indiana, that went through this, and the preacher ended up in jail because he paddled somebody in the Christian school, even though public schools always did it for years and years, but now no longer was it legal. Well, Lester Roloff got into some of that trouble down there at his boys' home. He was incorrigible kids. They would be sent to these young men's homes, and they would use corporal punishment. They would use different methods of training, including hard work and sweat and that kind of thing to work the wiggles out of them, I guess. So what happened was the state came in and tried to shut it down. I remember a Marine named Cleve McClary lost his arm in Vietnam. He went down and he stood. He was a Christian man, put his dress white uniform on, posted a flag, and stood right at the entrance and told the social services people if they were going to come in, they'd have to run over a Marine. He wasn't moving. Stood right in the middle with the flag posted. Preachers from all over the country came down there. My dad was one of them. And he stood hundreds of preachers surrounded that compound, Bible to Bible. One preacher had his Bible on this side, and they put their Bibles between them so that anybody come through, and then Cleve McClary would stood right in the front. When the social services people came up, Bibles surrounding the place. Nobody could come through. No guns. Now there was a group of guys came down from Indianapolis that had some guns in their trunk because they were ready for an insurrection, kind of like what happened at the Capitol building recently. And they decided it was time to stand. And they weren't going to pay taxes. They weren't going to do anything like that. I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't pay taxes if Jesus didn't tell us to, because I don't like paying taxes. I don't like what they're using my money for. But Jesus said pay their taxes, so I'm going to have to just keep doing it. But these guys were anti-taxers, and they had these guns. And so they were passing out guns. Lester Roloff walked by and saw them getting guns out of the trunks, and he said, "Boys, pack your guns and get out of here. You're not welcome. We don't want you here. We're going to do this peacefully." And you know what? That they did, and the social services backed down. They took Lester Roloff to court. They tried putting him in jail. They did everything they could do. And you know, he won freedom for Christian schools, for homes. When I was junior in high school, I think it was, we went to Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and I joined with other people myself. I was just a teenage boy. My dad took me with, well, we took a big bus and went down there, and they were trying to close this girls' home in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And we all went there, and we did the same thing. Just stood there and rallied, and the government backed away. You know what? God didn't want them to close them down. People were saying, well, get guns. It's the end. It's the end. We're going to stand up. We're going to Revolutionary War time again. And God said, don't you worry about that. I got this. You know? I wonder what happened when the Communist Party took over Moscow, took over Russia. Did God stop working in Russia? Now, you get what I'm saying here? We don't have to worry. God has His way. Jesus has His way in the whirlwind, no matter what the problem is. I hope you're getting this. What I'm saying. We should fight. We should do everything we can do politically, everything we can do spiritually, everything we can do. Fight for our town. Fight for our area. We should. But don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Christians walk around most of the time with their chins dragging on the floor saying, oh, woe's me, America, America, America. Look, it's okay. It's going to be fine. God's still on the throne, right? Hello? So, all right. The next thing I want you to see here is verse 18. So in verse 18 of chapter 18, we have Paul leaving. This is after this, he tarried there yet a good while. So they tried shutting him down, and he just stayed there a good while. And then he took his leave of the brethren and sailed thence into Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila. Remember we talked about Priscilla and Aquila last week a little bit. They were also tent makers. And so they decided to travel with him. And the Bible said he'd shorn his head in Cenchrea, for he had a vow. And I want to just take a little segue here and explain that little phrase. It's not part of the lesson, but I want to explain that little phrase. How many of you have heard of a Nazarite? Okay, not a Nazarene. Now a lot of the pictures you see of Jesus, supposedly, I talk about a long-haired hippie white guy. It's not Jesus. I'm not being disrespectful. Whoever that guy in those pictures isn't Jesus. But what happened, they always make him long hair because they mix up the word Nazarite and Nazarene. Jesus was a Nazarene, which means he was from Nazareth. So he was a Nazarene. A Nazarite is someone who had a vow. A Nazarite vow, Samson had a Nazarite vow from his youth. Elijah was probably a Nazarite, and more than likely John the Baptist was a Nazarite. A Nazarite was a guy who had his hair, who never cut his hair. Now, most Nazarites were not lifelong Nazarites. Most Nazarites would only be a Nazarite for a period of time. They would let their hair grow for a vow. When they were done with their vow, they would shave their head to say that they were done with their vow. Now, the Jewish custom, the priest was not supposed to shave his head. He wasn't supposed to do that because God didn't want him looking weird. It was just something different, you know. He didn't want him. I'm not saying you look weird if you shave your head, okay? God bless you, Jeremy. but honestly, he didn't want. I mean, I know it's customary now. A lot of young preachers, because they're balding and they're a little bit vain about it, don't want anybody to know they're losing their hair, so they shave it all off so they'll look cool. And but I won't. I'm not against anybody doing that. But I won't do it because in the Old Testament, the priests were not allowed to do that. For a particular reason, God wanted a particular thing in front of the people. That's the way He wanted it, right? You got it? And so I hope you don't think I'm getting on everybody that shaves their head or anything. Huh? It's an extreme. There you go. Exactly. It's an extreme. And he doesn't want an extreme. That's just it in the front. You want a balance. So here's the thing. Paul at this time had shaved his head. So as a preacher of the gospel, he'd shaved his head for a reason. What was the reason? It was a vow he had taken. He'd taken a Nazirite vow. So what he doesn't tell you is that for a while, Paul had long hair. Because he just let his hair grow. And the reason was because he was letting them know, I have made a commitment to God for this period of time, and I'm not shaving, I'm not cutting my hair, I'm not doing anything to make me look anything but just natural. and it's a vow between him and God. And so then when he was done with the vow, he shaved his head, and everybody knew that's what the vow was. I mean, any questions about it, just ask me later. I don't know much about the Nazirite vow, but it's interesting. It had something to do with you didn't touch grape juice, anything. And I'll be honest with you, the whole grape juice business, let me chase that rabbit. We'll go down that hole for a minute. The thing about grape juice is really interesting to me because for some reason or other, there's a thing about that in the Bible. Very specific about grape juice and the fruit of the vine. There are times when that Jesus said, I'm not going to drink it again until I sit down with you in the kingdom. And I don't believe Jesus ever drank alcoholic wine. I don't believe Jesus made alcoholic wine. The reference new wine is in the Bible. And new wine is stuff that comes right out of a wine press. Do you know what comes out of a wine press? You know what a wine press is? It's something that makes wine. So, in the Bible. So, what comes out of a wine press? Grape juice. It's not fermented. See? So, again, we're clear off the Sunday school lesson, but do you want me to follow this a minute or not? You want to know about wine? So in the Bible, some of you said this, and the rest of you just stared at me, so we're going to go with this, all right? Because I want to tell you about it. I know I'm off track, but I want to tell you about it. So someone said to me this week, well, Jesus drank wine. Well, yes, he did. He did. But wine in the Bible is everything that comes from a grape juice, from grapes. The juice that comes from grapes. Wine would come in different, over a period, it would ferment, okay? So they didn't have refrigeration back then. So what they would do, oftentimes, would put them in a wine skin, a goat skin. You remember where Jesus said you don't put new wine into old bottles or the bottle will break? You know why? Because in those goat skins, you put grape juice in there, and after a while, you try to keep it cool, but after a while, it would ferment, and the bottle would get bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, then it kind of stretched to it, and you put fresh grape juice in, and then it would do it, and it'd break the bottle. Does that make sense? So wine in the Bible is grape juice at all of its stages. It can refer to fermented. It can refer to any point of grape juice. Remember at the wedding, they were saying, "How come you brought out the best last? Everybody always puts the best first, and then." Later, remember that? John chapter 2? What are you talking about the best? The best wine was the freshest grape juice. Good wine, now we got that backwards. They say, well, good wine, boy, this is 200 years old. It's like, seriously? You're going to drink 200-year-old food? Juice? Drink? Look, if your Coke is in your fridge for 3 weeks and the fizz is gone, you throw it away. Right? Because it's old. And that's we consider things that get older and older are less valuable. But the devil sure got us on the run, doesn't he? He's tricked us, hasn't he? So wine would actually be grape jelly as well. Because, see, what would happen is on the inside of a wineskin, oftentimes as the wine would dry, it would gel to the side of the skin. And they would travel sometimes with this because that jelly, grape jelly, would preserve something liquid. So they would travel across the desert. They could have something that would sustain them because there was still something in it that would help them. Now, remember in Proverbs, it says, "Look not on the wine when it is red, when it moveth of itself aright in the cup. And then he goes on to say, if it does, and he describes, you'll be like one walking on a ship when you're on the land. You will wake up and say, who hit me? When no one has hit you. And then he says the next morning you're going to wake up and say, let's do it again. Wow, doesn't that sound familiar? That's when the wine is at a certain point, you're not supposed to take it. Does that make sense? You say, well, that's not right because it's wine. We sell it in the store. Look, I'm going to tell you something. You know there's dates on things in the stores. Can I say to you, look not on the yogurt when it moldeth of itself aright. Do you get it? When it's got mold in it, you leave. Taste not thou thy bread when it molds. Come on. You know, it's really that simple. People try to make it complicated because it uses the word wine, because that's the word that encompasses every stage of grape juice in the Bible. So sometimes it'll refer to it as new wine. Noah got drunk. He drank juice of the vine, and it was not preserved, and he ended up getting drunk. It was an accident. And so he tells us in the New Testament, before preservation, he says, don't drink a lot of wine. You know why? He's not telling you to get rid of grape juice. Actually, grape juice helps your heart. It does a lot. It's strong. It's good for your heart. Grape juice is. He says, don't drink a lot of grape juice. Don't drink a lot of wine. Don't be given to wine. That's what he says. Why? Because if you're given to wine, you're going to say, boy, I want wine right now. I want wine. This is not as good as it should be, but I'll just drink it because that's what I want. And you'll go to every stage. It's like, to give you an example, anybody here have Netflix? Anybody here have Hulu? Amazon Prime? Anybody here like to watch movies? You ever sat down to watch a movie and there was nothing good on, and so you watched the junk that was on? You know, when that's all you want to do, you don't have a sham wedding to go to. All you have to do is watch junk. So when you're given to something, you end up taking a less than valuable choice because nothing else to do. Right? So when you're given to wine and you're addicted to giving to wine, that's what happens. Okay? So anyway, yes, ma'am. Yeah, Welch's grape juice. If you haven't heard me tell about that, Welch's grape juice, they decided years ago to make pure communion juice. They were one of the first ones to do this. They were pioneers in this, to keep the wine pure for communion. That's why they found it. I've been up there. I've been to the Welch's factory up in Westville, New York. I've seen it. It's pretty neat. It's right on 90. If you're going up there, through there, you go up 90 up through Erie, Pennsylvania, and travel. I think it's 90. Yeah, 90. You travel up into New York, on the west side of New York. There's grape vineyards everywhere. And they're in Westville. If you get off of 90 at Westville exit, my brother-in-law is pastoring about 15 minutes south of that exit in Mayville. Westville is just north of him, and that is where that factory is, and they produce pure grape juices, white grape juice, red grape juice, and it was done, they formed that company just to make communion juice so that you could have communion wine non-fermented. Now, a friend of my dad's was a chaplain in the penitentiary, and he said in Indiana, and they had a Lutheran minister come in, and he was serving fermented wine, and suddenly his communion services were the best attended in the prison, and they had to stop him from doing that, and he didn't know why, because Jesus had wine too. Well, no. If the wine is about the blood of Jesus, there's no corruption in the blood of Jesus. So there should be no corruption in the communion wine. All right? Same reason for the bread, why we have those flat, tasteless crackers. That's unleavened bread. That's what it is. All right? So we shot those two rabbits. Did we skin them enough? We can go on to something else. Back to Priscilla and Aquila, and we'll be done. So Priscilla and Aquila were traveling with Paul, and it says here, verse 23, after he had spent some time there, he departed and went over the country of Galatia and Phrygia in order, strengthen all the disciples. I thought that phrase "in order" was interesting to look at. He systematically went to every church and every community to try to organize everything the way it should. And a certain Jew named Apollos, born at Alexandria, an eloquent man and mighty in the Scriptures, came to Ephesus. Now, Apollos was a fine teacher, a fine preacher, but he was born in Alexandria. And I'm going to tell you one of the problems if you're interested in the Bible version issue, one of the problems that we have in our new versions is that the new versions come from the texts in Alexandria, Egypt. Alexandria, Egypt had a group of people that were actually perverted and heretical in their doctrines. And they were messing with the Bible text in Alexandria. And so if you pick up your NIV and you wonder why there are 60,000 words missing in your NIV, did you hear me? If you wonder why there are 60,000 words missing, that's how many are missing in the NIV. Whole verses are gone. If you wonder why, it's because the text that they used to translate from came from Alexandria, Egypt. So Apollos comes from Alexandria. He's heard some of the heresies. He loves the Lord. He's trying to do right. And Priscilla and Aquila take him aside. In verse 26, he began to speak boldly in the synagogue, whom when Aquila and Priscilla had heard, they took him unto them and expounded unto him the way of God more perfectly. They took him and they said, let me explain. This is how it really is. There was stuff in Alexandria about they didn't believe Jesus was God. There was a whole bunch of stuff like that going on. Bunch of heresies. And Alexandria, Egypt is kind of where some of the Catholic doctrine came from and some of the junk we have to put up with nowadays in our religious exercises. But my point about this, and I got to let you go, but Priscilla and Aquila took what Paul had taught them, and they took this young preacher and they instructed him. And Priscilla and Aquila were not apostles. They were just tent makers. Hebrews 5, he said, you have need that one teach you again what be the first principles. Now, here's what I want you to understand. Everyone in this room is supposed to be a teacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ, a teacher of the Bible. You're supposed to be a teacher. You're supposed to be helping people understand God. Now, don't pick up your little private doctrine and say, well, nobody else is teaching this, and so I need to teach this. Don't do that, because it's probably wrong. If no one else is teaching it, you're probably wrong. That's what my dad always told me. He said, if that's a new thing, it's suspicious. So, really, I mean, understand the truth has been being taught for 2,000 years. So you're going to find the truth throughout the last 2,000 years. You're going to find it somewhere. You've had the Bible for a long time. A lot of smart people. And you're going to find a lot of heresies, but you're also going to find a lot of truth. But the thing that we're supposed to be teaching, don't get wrapped up in teaching the law when you don't really understand it. Hello, Beth Moore. Stay out of that. She got really messed up because she decided to start teaching the law and got all into that. And wow, she's gone clear off the deep end. But what you're supposed to do is find people that don't quite understand the things that you understand and help them graciously and kindly, right? Right? There are pastors, young preachers, people in this area that love God with all their heart and soul and have no clue some of the things you know. But if you walk around saying, well, I'm not going to, they're saying that, I don't have the right to say anything. Well, that's a man of God. I don't want to touch him. Look, this is the Word of God. Okay? It's the Word of God. If you have the right attitude, the gracious attitude, you ought to be able to explain some things to some other people. And you know, if you can fix somebody's mess up, pastor friend, never met him before, came to see me this week. It's from someone from our local area. And he walked into my office with a mohawk. And then he told me his last sermon series on Easter, he played a clip of Highway to Hell and used it. And he used several rock songs about the way, clips in his service to teach some truth. And as I looked at him, I thought, God bless you. Do you know you're supposed to be preaching out of the Bible, actually, not out of rock songs. The rock songs are not meant to teach deep truths. And I'm thinking, what's the matter with you? The more I talk to him, the more I realize the guy is a sincere, loves God, has just come from a rough background. He's teaching what he knows. I decided to invest him. And I'm going to pray with him. He and I met up. We're going to meet. I'm going to pray with him. You know what? If I can get him to understand about some of the misses in the Bible, if I can get him to understand how much is in here that's so awesome, that you don't have to use AC/DC to teach a truth. If I can help him graciously, wow, you know how many people I'll be able to help? Because you want to slap the people in the church silly. You guys are sitting there listening to that? What's the matter with you guys? But they don't know any different, and they're excited about this new, fresh approach. You know what I'm saying? So there's people out there in our community that need some help and need some encouragement. And if they tell you that kind of stuff, just be gracious. But just be Priscilla and Aquila. Hey, did you guys know Acts 8:37 is missing in the NIV? No? Go read it. And then see if you can't show them what they need to learn. Did you know that this kind goeth not out but by prayer and fasting is not in the NIV? That verse is gone. Matthew 17:23, I think it is. It's gone. Why? It's the key to unlocking spiritual bondage. And it's gone. You say, well, you're just an old King James person. No. I'm bothered when they take verses and words out of my Bible. I'm bothered by that. So anyway, God bless you. Take a break.